first practicum project in this course was the leap year project, just to look at the workflow in creating a new Visual Basic application. And we created our interface and then we went in and added the code. I want to draw your attention to one line in this code, and that's line 5. And it has an apostrophe and says, comment, leap year is evenly divisible by 4 and not by 100. We can add comments to our code that are ignored by the compiler. Now we saw that when we click this green triangle up here, it runs our application, allows us to test and debug it, and it's taking our source code of all these different files that are being created, most notably our GUI interface, the form1.designer.vb, and our code form1.vb, but a bunch of other stuff that Visual Studio is doing for us, and it runs all that through a compiler that creates the executable binary file. That's a .exe extension. That's our goal. We've seen that if we make any slight mistake, since I'm going to get rid of this quote here, I get the red squiggly. And the same thing if I misspell a word, say black, I get the red squiggly. And if you have red squigglies, your program's not going to compile because the compiler doesn't understand what you're trying to do. That's the advantage of comments that we can add into our code, and we precede those comments with an apostrophe. What that says to the compiler is just ignore everything on this line after the apostrophe. That's there for my benefit as the programmer. Why would I add comments? Well, here we're simply discussing our algorithm, that the leap year is evenly divisible by 4 and not by 100. It's explaining our Boolean expression here. We haven't gotten to Boolean expressions yet, but that's what that's doing. It's adding a comment about the line above. We can put comments after a statement. Ignore this comment. And so when it compiles, it's going to ignore that. Anything after the apostrophe will be ignored. Now, contextually, it's going to recognize when we're using single quotes, those are not considered comments. So the compiler is smart enough to contextually understand what a comment is. Notice that color codes our comments in green. And so we want to use comments to note our reasoning or explain our algorithms. And that's helpful to our teammates of working in a team environment as they look at your code, trying to figure out what you're doing, and vice versa, trying to figure out what they're doing by looking at their comments. It's also helpful for those who maybe come after you, who take on this project after you've moved on to something else, or maybe along with the company, or you've taken on a project that was started by a previous employee of your company, and it's really helpful to know what they were thinking as you try to finish it or update it and make improvements. It's also helpful for yourself. So if you're writing projects that are only going to be for you, when you come back a year from now to look at your code and try to make improvements or add new features, it's really helpful to know what you were thinking at the time, because your thought process will change as you get better and better at coding. Let me jump over to another project. A couple weeks ago I was invited to do a workshop for junior high students, and I demonstrated using Visual Basic to create a bingo card that we randomly generate all the numbers for, and then to be able to print the card. And I had students create this, and then each one printed a card, and I also created a program to call the numbers, and we played bingo at the end of the workshop for prizes. Let me go into Visual Studio. Here's my GUI interface, but more importantly, I'm going to look at the code and show you how I use comments in this code. I'll add comments at the very top of my code that provide the copyright information, but also may discuss who the client was, what the purpose of this project was, contact information for the client, things like that. I will also create comment headers, usually 3 lines of asterisk, for different sections. So identify sections. This is all the class level variables. And again, we'll talk about those down the road. I do the same thing down here of here are methods for printing the card. So identifying different sections. Visual Studio does a nice job of putting lines in between our different methods or event handlers here. But if you print that out, you may not see those. So I like to sometimes add just a line of asterisk to separate the different procedures. Same thing here. Down here in my event handler to print the card, I have some code that I derived from a website that introduced a great solution that I implemented and modified for my purposes. I wanted to keep a record of where that was. So I add the URL in a comment. And sometimes I might disable code that I no longer want to use, or I used it just for testing purposes, or found a better way to do something, but I don't necessarily want to remove that code. I want to leave it there for reference. I will comment those out. By the way, you saw we can put an apostrophe in front of a single line to comment it out, but we can also select multiple lines, go to the Edit menu, come down to Advanced. There's a choice to comment the selection, and a lot of apostrophes in front of each of those for you. You can also then select those lines, go back to Edit, Advanced, and say Uncomment Selection. So use comments in your code. By the way, when you're creating your portfolio and you want a potential employer to look at your code, if you have comments in it, they will thank you. They're more likely to offer you a position, entry level or internship, if they see that you comment your code well. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.